Hey, thanks for tuning in to Manage Expectations. My name is Victor and I'm an American living in Stockholm in Sweden. And Manage Expectation is a channel for those who, like me, live in Stockholm and enjoy going to events or activities in town. And the primary goal of this channel is to help you answer the question, is this worth my time? So what do I mean by, is this worth my time? Basically, is this something for those of you who, in this case, like theater, and maybe you learned something, maybe you have got a new point of view, or maybe you just were surprised, hopefully in a positive way. So today I'm going to be talking about Kärlek På Svenska, which is a stage production currently on at Dramaten in Stockholm. And if you didn't know, Kärlek På Svenska means love in Swedish. And I'm going to give you two disclaimers before I get going. The first disclaimer is I can count on two hands how many shows I've seen in English and Swedish. So that is to say, I am by no means an expert. Also, the show is in Swedish, which is my second language. I have studied Swedish for several years. I've read dozens of books. I still take Swedish classes. I do a little bit of work in Swedish. So Swedish is in many ways a daily part of my life. So that does mean I'm still going to maybe miss some nuance in the show, but we'll get to that later in the video. So before I get started, I'm going to go through some background about the show, Kärlek På Svenska. I'm also going to give you some of my own observations and ways I think you can manage your expectations for this show, as well as giving you a bit of information, hopefully to help you answer the question, is this worth my time? So with that said, I think some brass tacks before we get started. På Svenska is a stage play, like I mentioned, happening here in town. And the show is premiered in mid-September and is running through the end of November. I didn't see any tickets for sale for December, but they might just be taking a pause in the production, but definitely check online. Tickets range between about 150 to 395 Swedish kronor, which there are some discounts for young people and certainly those who are also students. In my experience, even at the high end of 395 kronor is pretty affordable for shows in Stockholm, certainly at Dramaten, which is a prestigious institution here in town. And the doors open about 20 minutes before the production starts. There is a cafe that has kind of all of your standard fikabröd and alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. You can obviously pre-order your drinks before the show so that during intermission you can enjoy them. And overall, both the theater and the seats in the kind of cafe area are super comfortable, which I was pleasantly surprised. So a bit of background about Kärlek På Svenska. It was made for film in 2017, and you can actually still watch it today on SVT Play for those of you who live in Sweden. If you are watching this video and don't live in Sweden, I guess you can probably use a VPN. I'm not sure, leave a comment if you can watch it. And this show started as a film and then became a book, and now it is a stage play. And the show, as the title suggests, is about love in Swedish, but it actually really isn't about love in Swedish or any other language for that matter. It's really a show kind of showing the different ways our past experiences, our belief systems, how they influence the way that we show love. So with that said, the show has really nothing to do with Swedish, as it is more about people who live here in Sweden, who could have lived anywhere, and how they are actually sharing their experience about love. So there's also a really interesting article about this show that the original filmmaker back in 2017 got around maybe this show palpably not being possible in Sweden, which I think is pretty interesting, given that the quote was really around Swedes or maybe other Scandinavian people not being able to express such a deep emotion. So take what you want from it. As an American, I'm not sure if that's particularly true. I think Swedes are certainly capable of talking about their emotions just like any other culture, but I'll put those articles in the description section below. So let's get to how you can manage your expectation. Firstly, the show doesn't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. There are 9 members of the cast. They all have varying degrees of presence throughout the show, but you definitely walk away from this show, at least in my experience, not sure how the story ended. And as an American, we grow up on TV shows and movies, so I very much love beginning, middle, and end. I think that is probably experience with some other people here, but overall I felt that this show definitely didn't have that beginning, middle, and end. However, like I mentioned, some of these characters had a lot of presence and certainly were boisterous, and I think they definitely had kind of main character energy, which I really appreciate as an American living in Stockholm, where there is this sense of being a bit more even-keeled that I think works for a lot of people. So it was nice to see in a stage show in Swedish that there were these characters who maybe were exhibiting behaviors that normally you wouldn't see here in town. So that's something that was pretty interesting about the show. Despite the title and even the advertisements about the show throughout town, I definitely got the sense that this was going to be maybe like a serious show or maybe quite deep. And it was quite the opposite. It obviously had deep moments, and there were moments that were quite intimate and deep, but on the whole, it was quite lighthearted. And I think for a show like Kärlek På Svenska, it actually really helped that not only was it lighthearted, but the scene or the theater itself was also small with only about 400 seats. So wherever you were sitting in that theater, you felt very connected to the actors and the stories that they were trying to tell. And that is something I think in reflection, I went into this with no expectations, but definitely some expectations of maybe it being quite deep, but it was quite the opposite. Something I mentioned is I didn't do any research before watching the show, and during the show there was these kind of constant recordings being played of interviews, and now that I have the context that this show was based off of a film from 2017, I then realized, these interviews playing overhead were actually a part of the story. Again, this might have just been me not being fluent in Swedish and not catching it, but I certainly didn't pay attention to the recordings as much as I would have liked. So if you're going to the show, I definitely think pay attention to the recordings. They are giving you more context about the actual story being played. And I think the last thing is that this show, again, because of its advertisements and maybe with the costumes the characters were wearing, I had an impression that the show was going to take place maybe the late 70s and late 80s, but it was actually quite contemporary. It was taking place today and covering topics of love in terms of how divorce might influence how you might experience love, your sexual orientation, your identity, your past trauma. These were all things that were themes throughout the entire story that I think really reflect not only what's happening in Sweden, but kind of around the world, certainly in America. And I think that was really, really cool, not only to see these topics being explored, but also to see so many diverse faces on the stage, which I think is something I really appreciate. Now having lived here in Sweden for a while and being able to see all the different types of people that live here. So do I think this is worth your time? I think so. I think if we have the framework of, did you learn something? Did you get a new point of view? Were you surprised? I think this show really ticked all those boxes. I walked away having learned something. I definitely was surprised, probably because of my own lack of research, but overall I was surprised by how good the show did the thing that it was going to say it was going to do. So thank you for watching this video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. I'm probably going to do more these types of reviews. But with that said, thanks for tuning in.